So yeah, Chavelle and Phillip from Brand of FTL. Great to meet you. So, we've been chatting about a study you did recently in association with the Brown School at WashU. So what was the study, and tell me about it.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So back in 2018, we started a research study with the Brown School of Social Work with their community-based systems dynamics graduate program to look at the factors that influence and promote collaboration in communities of African descent. So essentially we, I don't know where to start.
I would say essentially, we were really trying to figure out, what does it look like to help collaboration in African American communities or communities of African diaspora, if you will, and just figuring out what are the barriers and then what helps and hinders, and then how can we kind of facilitate resources, connections to kind of help lower those barriers or improve the results.
Yeah. And we were interested in this particular research study because we are trying to promote economic development in the St. Louis community, specifically in areas that we have seen that there are clear socioeconomic divides. So St. Louis is a place where entrepreneurship is definitely thriving, but sometimes you drive across certain streets and you see communities that could benefit from some grassroots entrepreneurship that are not leveraging some of the opportunities that are available or not being invited to the table, depending on the perspective that you have. So we looked deep into the teams that African American entrepreneurs have and saw that they tend to be one or two founders. So we started to think about what would be necessary to really build startup teams in Black communities, and collaboration being one of those key engines for growth of startups. So that's kind of where we started. But in 2018, we had our first focus group where we had about 30 people come out to CET and really just tell us what collaboration means to Black individuals. And WashU helped us summarize that data, and then we followed up this year in 2019 to look more specifically at the individual and start thinking about values and behaviors that influence collaboration. But we're on a journey, so we'll see where we go next.
Yeah.
Right, so it was a study, and you produced a piece of research. So what was the methodology?
The methodology was, it was community-based systems dynamics. So there is a series of exercises that the team will run with a group of participants. So they ask the participants to engage in connection circles, which are essentially, when you think about everything that influences collaboration, really work with your small group and connect these factors in a way that you see fit. We also sent out some surveys to people to get some quantitative data and understand if there's any differences based on socioeconomic status, zip code, whether or not you're an immigrant or not, or whether or not you're St. Louis born and raised. And really the students went back and they used a modeling software to take all the information and maps that the different work groups did, create one big picture of this network or system. And then we bring in some more community members and say, hey, this is what we heard from you. Does this look right? And then we have another working session where we're just kind of tweaking things, and of course having more and more conversations. And then we basically built a final model that says, hey, this is what would promote collaboration in the African American community. So
I know one part that really intrigued me was the causal loop diagrams, because it was really about, hey, what factors positively impact some and what factors negatively impact others. And I think the more we kind of drew those causal loop diagrams to show the positive and negative impacts, you realize how much effect certain factors like growth mindset or trust really then impact the overall model. So that's pretty interesting.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of piece of research, like one of the pieces I've seen is a kind of big, like almost like a mind map or spidergram.
Yeah.
of all these different kind of connections.
Yeah.
And what's kind of unusual and interesting about it is it touches on topics like empowerment and, you know, distribution of resources. So what happened was you kind of had those conversations, then started to essentially plot this kind of spidergram, and then went back to the community and said, does the spidergram look correct?
Yes, that's exactly what we did. In the first and second round of these workshops that we had where participants came out in kind of a focus group type of session. But in the first session, we basically learned from the group that there were 4 components that were necessary to promote collaboration in Black communities. And they told us that, you know, they need strong leaders to be able to really foster collaboration, find out where there are shared interests and goals. Those leaders have to be able to build trust. They have to have a growth mindset, an abundance mindset. And then there needs to be professional networks there to support those leaders so that they can navigate and find leadership development opportunities, professional development opportunities, so that they can continue to grow and build their network. But we also learned from this group something that we weren't necessarily setting out to find, but that there is kind of this underlying need for the community to really also focus on what does it mean to have a healthy home and a thriving community to support collaboration. So basically, if your community isn't in the best shape, or, you know, if you are challenged with meeting some of your basic needs in the home, or maybe struggling with trauma or mental health issues, your capacity might not be freed up to be thinking about leading an effort, a collaborative effort, or leading a startup. So it was great conversation in the room about culture and, you know, the environment and how that plays in.
And it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You know, because if you don't have those basic needs met, you can't be fully invested in that work that really is about collaboration, about innovation. And, you know, to take a colorblind approach to ignore trauma of the individual, trauma in the community, it's kind of creating a blind spot into how we really collaborate well.
Yeah. Right. And so, you know, through the kind of engagement process, what you learned was that there were these environmental factors that needed to be taken into consideration. And on your map, it's kind of color-coded into 4 different zones. And what are those zones?
Sure.
Can you read them out?
We really started, one was the individual as a unit, which was kind of really focused on, you know, growth mindset, collaboration, shared goals and interests, and then a little bit of ego, if you will, just to say, hey, how is that individual ready to kind of be collaborative and ready to grow? Then there was the individual as a component, as another kind of sphere of influence, which was around, you know, access to social networks, the resources of that individual, which included their education, potentially their leadership, but then that kind of bled into the trauma of that individual, whether or not there was trauma there that maybe detracted from the resources of that individual. And then that kind of led into the third sphere of community culture. You know, just, hey, the focus on wanting to focus on generational wealth, nurturing the youth, but then even respect for elders. You know, how do you show up knowing that you should be paying homage, if you will, to those before you, and then looking out for the future in the youth. The last sphere was just the community environment, just really realizing that communities still need the resources, the government, access to programs, services that will help the entrepreneur, that will help the community really kind of amplify the collaborative efforts that were already happening. So there were kind of those 4 different spheres, but we tried to synthesize it a little bit more focused to, you know, how can Brand of St. Louis kind of add impact and add value, knowing that we could also be collaborative on our own and bring in partners to kind of come in on certain aspects.
Right. And so what was kind of one of the sort of insights you got from it that just really kind of set you alight and made you realize you're onto something?
That's a great question. I think for me, the insight that I got that really let us know that we were onto something was actually the feeling. It was the intangibles, right? The feeling in the room when we brought people to the space and they had so much energy and passion towards talking about this. that let me know that we were on the right path, because we had, Phillip and I have had many conversations about how we need to be more collaborative in our community, to bring 60 people together total over the course of the study and hear them really resonate these same themes and agree in the room and talk about action steps. I think that definitely energized us to continue working on this. I think what else really stood out for me was that there's also this hope that if we had, the strong leader presence and the networks, some of the more tangible things that Brand of St. Louis feels like we have the capacity and the skill set to help contribute to developing the individual and helping to build networks in partnership with some of the organizations that are working on, the community culture and community development piece. We felt like the fact that the group was telling us, hey, all these things go together, gave us more fuel to say, hey, we should continue working on collaboration because we know these players are in this space. So if we continue to work on this, long term, this should produce collective impact and community development.
And then for me, being in the community development space, just focused on economic development, it's very clear that organizations, CDCs, community organizations want to figure out how to help communities, and yet they're also coming with the assumption that whoever they reach out to in that community knows exactly what the rest of the community wants to see happen, and they're on the same page. So I think that's why it really sparked an interest and a passion of mine to say, let's figure out the internal community dynamics first. Let's make sure we are on the same page and we know what each other wants, because when outside resources come in to try to help, as well-intended as they can be, they're only going to hear the opinion of that one person or that one organization they contact if we're not all on the same page. And I think that just makes a very fragmented approach, and fragmentation of services came up in the conversation. So.
Yeah, what I find really fascinating about the report is that you knew you were tackling a really big problem, and in a way, you almost came out with a bigger one, but somehow it's more clarified.
Yes, it's definitely more clarified. In the most recent workshop that we did, that's why we focused more on the individual and the leadership component, just so that we can understand more what trust means and, what is a strong leader, because we saw that people were using this language, but we wanted to just make sure that we understood what they were trying to communicate and how that fits into the big picture. So yes, we have this big picture, and currently we're trying to deep dive into certain components of it, and the hopes that we can implement some actions or some strategies, or at least at a minimum release the report and share with others that, just acting on certain nodes in the big map might have a bigger impact than you realize, because all these other things are happening.
Right, and one example of that is that, you found this node around trust, accountability, and growth mindset. And then you also found this connection with the kind of cultural side of, respect for your elders.
Yeah.
And I think really going back to accountability, trust, growth mindset, you almost have to trust that the partners you bring in will be able to focus on what they do best, so that people don't start doing mission creep trying to solve all of these problems and boil the ocean, right? We need to kind of trust that we all have a specific lane, a specific focus, and then we're coordinating with each other whenever it's time to change lanes and partner together. So I think that goes back to accountability and trust. Right,
and I think that's what's really important about your work as well, is that, from this study, all these ESOs and entrepreneur support organizations that want to participate in the city, you can actually show them realistically you play in just this small part of the thing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we've been considering this whole time, because it's not just about how do we get people of African descent to collaborate with each other, but it's also about what Phillip mentioned about communicating our shared values with communities that are different from us, so that they can approach MOUs or agreements or even their community engagement work informed about what's important to us, because of course different cultures have different values, and we could also be more equipped to share that with them. It's okay, well, trust is really, really important to us, and accountability. We've seen these patterns from you in the past, like how are those things different now, or maybe what are you doing to build trust in other communities? I'm not sure exactly what it will look like long term, but at least it starts a conversation about what collaboration with communities can look like. Because I think we do a good job, St. Louis, like informing communities and in some way maybe involving them as we approach projects, but I really don't think that we have really gotten into what it looks like to collaborate with communities, and that's what we're trying to open up here.
And that kind of builds onto win-win partnerships. Like, how do we clearly, transparently communicate what a win-win partnership is for each organization, and then trust that we're going to execute on that agreement, that memorandum of understanding, if you will, like, hey, this is what success looks like, and this is how we get there.
Right. I mean, there's another kind of component, which is, mission-driven organizations seems to be enough, and often the mission is kind of not specific enough. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I also really liked was in your study, you found 68% of respondents said, I have to trust someone before I collaborate with them on a project or initiative. Right. Mm-hmm. But you also found 50% of respondents said the benefits have to be clear before I collaborate on a project or initiative. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really insightful, because actually that's relatively low. I mean, 50%, of people need a clear set of goals and outlines. Mm-hmm. And when these kind of mission-driven organizations are interacting, they're kind of staying in the sky.
Not coming down to understand what are actually the interests of the people in the community that they're trying to serve, right? So there might be, let's just say, healthy food initiatives in the community, but the community might be more focused on adequate wages, right? So they might need all of those things, but their immediate needs might be different than what you're intending to solve to. So it's just important to open up the lines of communication, and maybe you are solving to some of the needs that are important to them, but if those things aren't clear, then those communities are less likely to engage with you. But of course there are people who, if they at least have trust because you've been doing something in their community for a long term, or they've heard about you from a friend, that they'll be more open to have what you're offering. But if there's no trust at all, then having your objectives clearly stated or the benefits clearly outlined is probably a great place to start.
Yeah, and I know one saying is always, you don't want to be that hammer who is a hammer and sees every problem as a nail, right? You want to be willing to understand, hey, not every situation or opportunity is going to require my hammer. I might need to reach out to the saw in the community to really focus on another way to approach the situation. So.
Right. At EQ Leadership Labs, the conference we ran this year, we were also looking at this concept of leadership. And Tim Sanders, the keynote, drew this distinction between collaboration and cooperation. Mm-hmm. There's a joke around bacon and eggs. It's like the chicken's involved, but the pig is fully committed. Mm-hmm. And that was how he kind of distinguished the difference between cooperation and collaboration. What definition of collaboration did you arrive at?
I think it's still ever evolving, but I know one thing that came up in the two research studies was the idea that we needed small wins, and we need to recognize those small wins to eventually get to a full collaboration and collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you kind of keep that community narrative of, hey, we did this small project together and it worked out well. Let's celebrate that so that people can build trust, so that we can build up to that full commitment of collaboration, if you will,
Yeah, I would add on that to say that we did find that what we have been talking about, there's three main factors that must be present in the community that we're talking about for a collaborative relationship, and that those three things are trust, growth mindset, and shared goals and interests. So that's why we've been diving into what does it really mean to build trust, what does it mean to build a growth mindset, and how do we create more platforms where people can identify what their shared goals and interests are and build win-win. So at one of our most recent meetups, we brought in some Franklin and Stephen Covey philosophy on the speed of trust, right? So in corporations, they often bring the Covey series in to help with leadership development. So we are familiar with the speed of trust, and it's an excellent resource. So we tried bringing those same behavioral traits into our Cultivate Community Network group. And, they responded very well to it and, had open conversations about how we can build trust with factors we're strong in, with factors we have some opportunities with. So the solutions to some of the challenges that we identified, they're out there, right? Just maybe used in different ways and may not be as accessible to this particular group.
Well, I love that. I mean, I think what you're saying there is ideas like the speed of trust are out there already, but they're kind of stuck in a business context.
Yes,
we need
to
recontextualize those ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
And that kind of brings the overlap between the professionals, the community leaders, the entrepreneurs, and the creatives. They see language and things differently, and yet the professional world and corporate America have all these books, all these articles and resources, as if those don't relate to the creatives and the entrepreneurs. We just have to kind of translate it and find the shared language to connect.
Right. And, I think also I just find it fascinating that you identified this pillar of growth mindset. I mean, that's the sort of thing you can kind of take for granted, and yet when you put it down on paper, it's like, oh yeah, that's crucial.
Yeah, it's definitely something that continues to come up in the conversations that we have about collaboration, whether they call it ego or whether they call it scarcity mindset, or the grass is greener on the other side. I'm not there's a pull to go towards something that is not your community because only one of you can make it out of the community. This mindset, it continues to come up, and I have to admit that it's difficult to build and talk about, but I think starting with trust starts to open up the lines of communication and self-reflection. But the concept of that all ships rise with the tide, that there's enough resources out for us, those are messages that we have to continue to communicate, and then show some of these win-wins. That's another initiative that we've started. I think trust and the win-wins will help people be able to visualize what growth looks like, so that their minds and their paradigms can start to shift, because I think it's easy to talk about having a growth mindset. I think it's difficult for people to recognize when they're behaving with a scarcity mindset in certain settings.
Right.
So it takes a little bit more strategy and maybe psychology. I'm not a psychology major to have those types of conversations. So we're trying to demonstrate where growth mindset is present.
Yeah, and we don't want to ignore the fact that there is historical context that explains why some people aren't as trusting of other people, So we're definitely not trying to ignore that. We just want to acknowledge that, hey, take it one step at a time, one partnership at a time, see how it works, find ways to show that, hey, the partnership was accountable, and then build on that success.
And I think that's a good point, which is, you said, one step at a time, breaking these into kind of little problems, and overcoming each one. It's like that growth mindset, it kind of needs to come from addressing each issue one by one. It's not, again, just like mission-driven stuff. It's not just like one positive state of mind,
Yeah, and sometimes we get acclimated to a culture where we as Black people, we do look around in more affluent places and tend to be the only one, right? So how much does our community reflect that maybe there can only be one of us in certain spaces, right? So we're countering a pretty prevalent culture and mindset. So not that it can't be changed, it's just not something that's going to be changed overnight, right?
Yeah. And it's like crabs in the barrel mentality. If you see that other person that looks like you, do you see them as a potential partner? Or do you have something in your historical context and your background that makes you see them as the competition or someone coming to take your spot, right? And then how does that impact collaboration and trust?
Yeah, which are all normal things happening in corporate day-to-day life.
It is all normal things, and I think that's where the strong leadership piece came kind of into the fold, because these individuals who participated in this project, they saw the presence of a growth mindset as a quality of a strong leader, and 95% of them said strong leadership is essential for building collaboration within Black communities. So if they see people that they respect who are making change in the community also have a strong growth mindset of giving back to the community and investing in the community and trusting the community to take on projects, they will be more inclined to model those same behaviors. So in a lot of ways, just recruiting leaders that have this mindset could help to start to shift some others.
Right, which is absolutely massive.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, you've got a message for leaders right now, which is share your growth mindset.
Yeah, share your win-win, share your how you're collaborating, and I mean it goes a very, very long way.
And then one big thing that we think about as we started Brain of St. Louis even is we thought through, hey, what does it look like if people kind of copy our approach to this mindset, to this collaborative effort? And we realized if people copy this approach, we will be in a much better situation in St. Louis, right? So the idea of the crabs in the barrel, like, we're not worried about that, because the idea is to spread this idea of collaboration. And if we can do that successfully, we would love for people to copy this approach and actually work together, right? So I think it's not supposed to be a secret. The success model is not supposed to be something you hoard, and we try to keep that in mind. Sometimes leaders, they like to keep secrets of what works for them, and that's only helping their small circle. That's not helping the larger community.
So, I mean, do you see yourselves sharing the model soon and kind of making it public?
Yeah, we definitely see ourselves publishing the model. We've definitely shared it with the groups that are involved with Cultivate Community, but we want to publish it. We want to publish the survey. Of course, the survey is still open. We're collecting data ongoing just to continue to validate some of the findings that we have, but the model we will post either on social media or on our website, but we will be sharing it.
And we want to get more feedback to it, so we need to get it out there so we can continue to fine-tune it, continue to improve it, because it's not a static model,
Right.
It's going to evolve as we get more input, as we get more reactions to it, and over time get stakeholders in St. Louis to react to it, because they're going to come with a different perspective to say, hey, let me explain this side of it, and then maybe we flesh out certain success key factors a different way, knowing that we have more insight. So we would love to share it in combination with stories, to your point about highlighting the strong leaders. Like, as we share the model and talk about trust and growth mindset, it would be great to accompany that with stories about how people have exhibited growth mindset and prospered in their lives and in their business, or even like personally on their own spiritual journey, right? Like how these concepts have helped them be more open and collaborative. Because I think that'll help the model have even more impact if people can relate to it and relate to individuals who are living these models. Because something else that we learned while doing this research and sharing it with people is that we started to hear from others like, oh yeah, so-and-so does that really well. And it's like, yeah, they do, like they approach partnerships and always looking for shared goals and interests, always listening so that they can find how they can help someone else out first before even asking for, whatever they need. And I think that's powerful too. People start to recognize maybe even why they value other people or hold them to a certain esteem is because that person has these common values that we haven't been talking explicitly about, but implicitly has been, the common thread in our community, right? So this is just, again, helping with that shared language.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, you're kind of creating a living document. I think it's really cool.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Like, I guess, how would people, you put it out there and you want people to sort of put the model under pressure. What kind of thing would they have to do that?
So I know we currently are hosting meetups where we're kind of taking pieces of it and kind of breaking down some of the concepts in the model, and we're getting a lot of great feedback around things like, hey, how do you identify a win-win partnership? What does that look like? And as we hear people's conversations in these meetups, we tend to use that to kind of pivot what it really means to get to a win-win partnership. And does that mean you give your 30-second pitch, for example, and then also maybe that 30-second pitch is more about both what you offer and what you're looking for, you know? So then all of a sudden that 30-second pitch people are used to becomes maybe a minute pitch that involves a little bit more, hey, this is the help I can provide others, and this is what I'm looking for. And people are just open and honest about that. So that kind of helps us decide, hey, what is really needed when we talk about this collaboration.
Yeah. I think how they can also challenge the model is through kind of the quantitative survey that we have, because we have made an attempt to simplify the model in a way into just simple statements, very similar to the conversation that we've been having, like asking people, is strong leadership important for collaboration, right? And if enough people say no, then we're looking at the model and saying, okay, well, it shows up here, but maybe this word leadership needs to be tweaked, and maybe we need to have another large workshop and share this data with people. And to your point about the benefits of the collaboration being clear, like only 50% of participants said that, right? So really what they were saying is that they need strong leaders to be able to communicate a message that they identified and share goals and interests. It's a part of that. So we learned more about how these factors play with each other from things like the survey, right? Because it's on the board for a reason, but the weight of it differs within the community overall, but then even within certain segments. So certain communities thought culture and generational dynamics and respect for elders. I think African immigrants definitely saw that as more important. Well, I think that's great data and context to have as African immigrants partner with African Americans. And even as we build as a community overall, just to think about where we weight certain things in relationships.
And it goes back to really the difference between diversity of lived experiences. And I think that's something this model has really brought out by us talking about it as African descent or African diaspora. It's not about your race or ethnicity. It's just about your experience and how that experience has molded whether or not you trust as quickly or whether or not you want to focus on the elders or the youth. I think that's the conversation that's really making us see each other more similar than different, and then realizing it's just our lived experiences that are the different things, and we can unpack that. Besides, what sometimes ends up happening is people are always just reacting versus reflecting on, like, hey, why do I feel this way about this situation? What in my past has impacted that? And maybe I can put that to the side and realize that that's just in the past, or maybe I need to pull some of that back up because it feels similar, and that'll help me be proactive in kind of how I end up moving forward in this. So it's been very, very interesting to see the different dynamics once you unpack terms African descent, African diaspora, to really be inclusive of people of color or black. It's exciting work.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, keep going.
Thank you. We're so early on this journey.
And we're bringing in partners like African Chamber of Commerce, Heartland Black Chamber. So we're trying to bring certain partners who at least have a focus in this work, knowing that there's so many other partners we need to bring to the table, and we just need to kind of always have an open call, be inclusive, and kind of work with the people who are ready to kind of sit down with us and connect. Try to show up as much as we can.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, Phillip, Chavelle, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I guess people can go to brandofstl.com to find out more.
Yeah.
And then follow us on social media. We've got LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Brand of STL.